Thank you all so much for participating in this exciting endeavor that we're on. I'd like to welcome Mr. Daniel Nahmod now.
Hello. I think this is a worthwhile thing to renovate. This is a worthwhile place. Don't you think? Yes. I told the first service I've been coming here to sing kind of since probably 1999, maybe 2000. I had more hair on my head, less in my ears, and probably 30 pounds less on my body. But I remember it fondly. And we just, Melina and Jude and I just moved into a new old home. And we have renovations on our brain too. And it is, in fact, a perfect example of what it means to allow your inner self-respect, this isn't a pep talk, I'm saying like your inner self-respect to show up in your home the way it can show up in your clothes or not show up in your, literally Jude is embarrassed when I pull up, to drop him off at school, he's embarrassed at the messiness of my car. And he's only 8. It's gonna be a long, long childhood for him. Anyway. But it does show up, and I can envision a new floor in here. It's gonna feel different. It feels different to dress up. It feels different to renovate. So I'm excited for you all, and glad to be back. Take a breath, take a seat. Take a moment and just be. Here you are, that's enough. Give yourself permission to unplug. People say the world is always speeding up, that there's hardly even time enough for love, that Mother Nature doesn't get things done the way that humans can, that we must never stand in the way of progress. It's time to slow it down, slow it down, slow it down now. Time to take a breath, and slow it down. Time to look around at where we are now, at what we've become, and where we're headed. It's time to slow it down. Time to slow it down. Oh, it's time to slow it down, slow it down. Slow it down. Don't get me wrong, I'm grateful to see. At sunset I'm gone in a reverie. My beautiful bride, my baby's smile. A country road rolling on for miles. But sometimes my eyes discourage instead, blurring the vision I have in my head. A dream I'm after fades further from view, till only the obstacles look true. And lately I wonder if I were blind for a day, where would I go if my heart had its way? Would I see more than the doors that have closed in my face? If I were blind for a day. There's a girl in high school with a heart of gold, smart as a whip. She's brave, she's bold. But when she looks in the mirror, all she can see is heavy and ugly and unworthy. And I can't help but wonder if she were blind just for a day, would she still be cruel to herself that way? Or maybe she'd see there's nothing she needs to change if she were blind for a day. Blind for a day. How do our eyes deceive us? Where does our vision fail? Whether parent or teacher, policeman or preacher, we see what we think we'll see. We believe what we're taught to believe. World on fire, world afraid. So we focus only on enemies made. Colors divide us, holy books too. Political parties, well, what else is new? Still I dare to wonder if we were blind for a day, what kind of world would we create? If behind our disguises we find that we're all the same. If we were blind for a day, I'd like to think things would change. If only the blind would lead the way. Well, I used to dream out loud. Just being human made me proud. Now I throw my hands up in the air from disillusion and despair. My heart has taken such abuse. I've used my hurt as my excuse. It's like my hope has disappeared behind the shadow of my fear. And I wonder why they say that aging thins the skin. Then I remember I am only one, but I am not alone. I don't need to do everything, no. I can right one wrong, I can sing one song. I don't need to do everything. It's time to dive back in, yeah. It's time to live again. I am unjaded. What if you have to fall to grow? I've fallen hard enough to know. So what if life's not fair? Does it mean that I'm too cool to care? And I wonder when I stopped believing right will win. Then I remember I am only one, but I am not alone. I don't need to do everything, no. I can right one wrong, I can sing one song. I don't need to do everything. It's time to dive back in, yeah. It's time to live again, unjaded. What kind of life would I live with my heart closed? What kind of man would I be? What kind of world will I be creating if I can love with all of me? If I just love with all of me? I am only one, but I am not alone. I don't need to do everything on my own. I can right one wrong, I can sing one song. I don't need to do everything. I am only one, but I am not alone. I don't need to do everything, no. I can right one wrong or sing one song. I don't need to do everything. It's time to dive back in, yeah. It's time to dive back in. Oh, it's time to live again. I am unjaded. Whoa, unjaded. I don't buy what these Google folks are selling, that we should all be living at the speed of light. Seems like all these glowing screens are always yelling to fill my head, but never give me peace of mind. It's time to slow it down, slow it down, slow it down now. Time to take a breath and slow it down. Time to look around at where we are now, at who we've become and where we're headed. It's time to slow it down. Time to slow it down. Oh, it's time to slow it down, slow it down, slow it down. I was driving with my boy, Jude, who's 8 now, a couple years ago, and on 17th Street in Tustin, where we live. And I mindlessly thought about changing lanes to my right and grabbed the wheel and just jerked the car for a second. I don't change lanes without looking. I really don't. But I almost did that time. And Jude is so I'm in the driver's seat. Jude is back here to my right in the back in his little kid seat. And the car in my blind spot honks and then passes us. And Jude gets a good look at him, and he says, "Daddy, why did he honk?" He looked mad. And I said, "That's because I almost changed lanes and hit him. And in doing that, I scared him. And when people get scared, it almost always changes to anger. So he looked angry, but in fact, he was scared." And I'd never thought about that before. I just said that to him. I was trying to explain why the guy looked angry, and I suddenly realized that I'd hit on something that probably most of you figured out a long time ago, but it took me that moment to realize that, and since then I've applied that filter and that thought to a lot of situations. And I have found very few exceptions to this rule of mine, anyway, that when someone is acting angry, in fact, they're scared. I'm not convinced that we're like 99%, more than 99%, the same as chimpanzees, chromosomally. I mean, we're very, very close to some primate cousins. Very close. We're very close to bananas. We are, but we're especially. It's true. Look it up. But we are especially close to chimpanzees and animals that throw poop to express their emotions, and animals that wage war in tribes for territory, and animals who we would call, I hate the word, I've always noticed the word, long before I was a member starting college of People for the Ethical Treatment of Animals, I always hated the word beast. There are words that people use to describe wild animals, lions and such, and I always thought, I don't know if people act that different. And at least most of the time, animals are doing it for survival, for hunting and survival. Maybe, aren't we kind of the beasts really in this situation? It's kind of, it was always something I was asking myself. But so I'm not a huge believer in us being all that different from other species. In fact, I've always been bothered by referring to other species as animals and us not. I always blow Jude's mind with like scientific stuff. I love doing that. I'm like, and one of the most mind-blowing thoughts is, Jude, we're animals. What? No, really, think about all the animals you've ever known about. Heart, lungs, eyes, brain, spine. But it goes farther than that. It goes further to feelings, survival instinct, caring for young. A dandelion is going to protect itself from abuse, right? Dandelions get jaded. If you keep messing with the sun angle of a plant, that plant is going to lean to the sun or start eroding in, I would say, in upset. You know, if every animal covers up and protects itself, or as I once heard a beautiful book called I think it's called Brief History of Everything, or Nearly Everything. Life wants to live. Period. You've seen it in weeds. You've seen it in refugee camps. You've seen it everywhere. Life wants to live. So how in touch are we with some higher, what do you want to call it, consciousness, when we're capable of instantaneous anger transmuted from fear, which we were actually feeling? In other words, how aware are we of how we're actually feeling at any given moment? When we do a good deed, do we know actually all the time why we're doing it? When we lash out, do we actually know why we're lashing out? When we reach for some ambitious goal, do we actually know where that ambition came from or what it's for? What part it's intending actually to fill? I had a therapist. This is twice I've talked about Jeff in one day, and that's twice in 10 years or 15 years I've talked about him. There it is. But he was a therapist in Chicago before I moved to LA to make music for a living. And Jeff and I were talking about addiction cycle. My personal addiction is sugar, and it's relentless and brutal. And it has made me, among other things, much more compassionate towards all addictions, because I can't stand cigarette smoke, and I want my boy to never take one puff. But that does not mean I look at somebody smoking outside the airport and feel contempt. I might have a long time ago, but now I realize I'm just lucky that my problem, or whatever it is, my addiction is Snickers bars and hot fudge, and not Marlboro, because I would never have been able to quit Marlboro, and I'd probably be dead by now. You know, so that's how that's you know. So in other words, there's the bright side of an addiction. I mean, it is. If you're paying attention, you realize that the it's just like we mothers are the same all over the world. They cook different recipes and wear different clothes and take their kids to a different house of worship. But mothers feel about their kids the same everywhere. And addicts are addicts. And I am an addict of sugar. And Jeff and I, the therapist, were talking about how this addiction might be broken. And he described this vicious cycle that I never forgot. He told me this in probably 1995 or so. And he said, the simplest way to look at the addiction cycle is you feel like crap, so you medicate yourself, and then you feel more like crap, so you medicate yourself. That's kind of it. And around you go. And so his it's not a solution. I call it a prescription. His prescription for improving, if not full-on eradicating, let's face it, nibbling at the edges, as far as I can tell, is kind of the best we can do in most things. Improving, right? So his recipe for improvement was to slow down the cycle. Meaning, before having the hot fudge sundae on a full stomach, take a few seconds to ask myself how I'm feeling. Because most likely, hot fudge is love, we can all agree on that. And most likely, so are Pop-Tarts, most likely I am medicating rather than eating, right? And if I'm medicating, then there's something going on. And if there's something going on, I can either notice it or not. And noticing it takes a few seconds. So Mr. Hypocrite up here at the piano usually doesn't. But I know that when I do, I find out what's wrong, right? And a far, far more distressing example is the reason why I'm talking about this at all today is this incident that happened in Norco about a week ago. If you don't know about it, you don't need to, but if you do know about it, you know how sad this story is. But it's a group of teenage boys were in a car and decided to ding-dong ditch. They decided to ring the bell of a house of a kid they knew and ring the bell and then run away for fun. And 6 of them in the car, 16 and 17-year-olds, and they did that to the house. But they had the wrong house, or the little boy didn't live there anymore. And a man in his earlier 40s was the victim of this prank and flew into a rage and saw the kids tear away in their car and got in his own car and tore after them and kept smashing his car into theirs until they crashed. And 3 of the 6 boys died in that crash. Now, this man's life is over. Not to make a crazy leap, but when I say his life is over, my Bubby and Zadie survived the Holocaust. They never saw their families again the day they left their village in Poland. Did they survive heartbeats, brains? Yes. Did they go on to have children? Yes. But they died that day. And that man died that day, the day of that accident, that crash. Not an accident. As did the 3 boys who died, as did their families die, as did the 3 boys who survived. A part of them died that day. So when I think of Jeff's take a few seconds to break the cycle, and I heard that story, and I'm sure everyone else who read that story thought, if he had taken 10 seconds before jumping in his car, the trajectory of dozens, hundreds, thousands of lives would have changed from just a few seconds. All he needed to do that he didn't do was allow himself to acknowledge the fear that he felt when the doorbell rang and he saw a group of teenagers running around outside his door. That fear turned into, obviously, a blinding rage, which we can all relate to, whether we do it or know somebody who does it, or were victims of it as a kid, or victims of it in school, or were victimizers. We all know that rage. I fly into that rage when I find out that my health insurance policy was canceled because of a mistake from somebody at Blue Shield. My boy has heard me scream, and I'm usually screaming to a customer service agent. And it's when I'm finding out that this actually happened a few years ago, when I found out that for the preceding 3 months, my family was not insured because of a clerical error somebody made over at Blue Shield, misstated something, and therefore canceled my policy. So was I enraged or was I scared? Because what I was actually screaming to this poor guy on the phone was, if we'd had a car accident, I would have lost my house. My family would be wiped out, and I didn't know, right? Fear. Not my most conscious moment, okay? 5 seconds of breathing would have acknowledged that I was just afraid, right? 5 seconds of acknowledging before the hot fudge sundae would acknowledge, I'm just sad, or I'm just stressed about the bank account, or I'm just disappointed, or somebody just threw me a facial expression that I read as disapproval and it hurt my feelings, so I'm now eating them. 5 seconds can make all that difference. I'm going to go to the guitar. To me, the thing, and I do it when I'm songwriting too. Songwriting is a very mysterious process, and anybody who tells you they figured it out is lying or probably trying to sell you something. And it's true. It's really true about any art. In fact, it's true about life. Really, is there don't seem to be any masters of anything. And what you do is you do the thing, and you look back on it, and you find out how you were doing. I write songs, and they tell me, "Oh God, I was stressed." I don't know. I think I know. But then I write the song, and it tells me a year later or a month later or even an hour later what was stirring around. So what I'm talking about today, and it's really just all I ever do is think out loud and hopefully plant some seeds. That's all. Provoke a thought or a feeling. There's no resolution to this conversation. There's no big finish. What I'm talking about is taking those seconds to become aware of how you're actually doing, what you're actually wanting, what you're actually feeling. Ambition can be that way. Yearning for something. We all know rock stars. You can think of 20 examples, probably we could just list them, who achieved what would look like the pinnacle of their ambition and then committed suicide. Which means at some point there was a massive disconnect between what they thought would fulfill them and what actually would. What would actually fill their void versus what they bought into or were convinced of or convinced themselves of. There was a gap. And who's to say whether 5 seconds would clarify that or 5 minutes? But, I would never have given a talk I'd ever give a title with the word mystic in it. But when I think about some of the great thinkers and talkers, they did a lot of sitting quietly. A lot of meditating. Even if they didn't call it meditating. I mean, Buddha had his revelation sitting under a tree, and he sat under the tree a long time. Isaac Newton, sorry to jump different field, Isaac Newton left the city in the 1600s because of the plague, went to an estate that he was left as a child, and sat essentially alone for 2 years. That's when he invented calculus, deduced the law of gravity, and deduced that white light is combined colored light. Right? In the silence and in the quiet is when he did it. Einstein spent his entire professional life sitting in his office and thinking. It's what he did. And when people asked him if there was a secret to his genius, he would say, sitting and imagining and thinking. And when you think about metaphorically, this is me rambling way different direction I ever would in a million years, but Moses went up to the mountain for 40 days before coming back with some kind of revelation. Jesus went out into the desert, didn't he? Everybody goes somewhere quiet. We can always do that. It's always available. Before screaming, hit the blue shield, agent, I could have taken a breath. It also shows up, and this is the last point I want to make, it also shows up in daily interactions with people on the flip side, not on the anger and tantrums, but also in the area of kindness and compassion. We have knee-jerk reactions that are based on all kinds of things going underneath our surface. Oh, I'm not going to give you $5, Or somebody else says, like about the carpeting. Somebody else has more money than me. We make decisions that we're not consciously making. My boy showed me, reminded me of what it's like to be entirely in touch with the kindness that I think we're all born with. A while back, when we got a phone call from his teacher, and after an incident in school. So I'm going to sing you this song and then tell you real briefly about that and close for now. Lately I've been thinking about what motivates me to give a couple dollars to a stranger on the street. to hold the door, carry groceries, help a neighbor in need. When history repeats itself in headlines every day, solutions never big enough for problems that we face. As a man, as a dad, what difference can I make? 'Cause I know better than to think I'll be remembered for a favor or a quarter or a smile. Oh, but maybe before I return to sender, I can do one thing worthwhile. So I'm gonna try. I'm gonna try to raise a kind child. Sure would help if our boy went and got an MBA and took care of his artist mom and dad and their old age. But let's face it, Wall Street probably isn't in his DNA. But when his first grade teacher said she wanted us to know, it's Jude who always comforts any kid who sits alone. There's just so much pride my heart can take. My retirement can wait. Cause I know better than to think I'll be remembered for a fortune or a pension or a prize. Oh, but maybe before I return to sender, I'll have done one thing worthwhile. So I'm gonna try. I'm gonna try to raise a kind child. I don't want him to think the world is his to save. It's too much pressure anyway, it can't be done. I don't want him to think he has to be a saint, 'cause the truth is saints don't have any fun. Mostly I just hope my boy will come to understand no 401k or GPA can make a happy man. It's having roots, doing good, helping out where you can. So put down roots, do some good, take somebody's hand. And you'll know better than most what really matters, what makes living this life worthwhile. And there may come a day your own kids will remember how their granddad used to say with a smile that he raised. We raised a kind child. So there was a boy in his class who didn't speak English and was throwing elbows and getting in all kinds of trouble, and who could blame him? He's like 6 years old, doesn't have any idea where he is, just arrived from Vietnam with his family, and was struggling in school. And one day his teacher called, Jude's teacher called, and said, I wanted you to know that your boy is the kindest boy in class. And I started crying. And then and she said, he's always looking out for a kid who's sitting alone or needs a crayon color they can't find or doesn't know where the bathroom is. He's just helpful. She said, but today he really did something special I wanted to tell you about. I finished reading a book for the class, 25 kids on the rug. And when I finished, Jude raised his hand, and he pointed to the boy who didn't speak English, a Vietnamese boy. And he said, "I think Evan did such a good job listening that he should get an extra point today." And I said, and so Jude came home, and I said, "Boychik," Yiddish, "Boychik, that is a beautiful thing you did." Because all he's been hearing is correction and do this and do that, instruction he doesn't understand. And 7 weeks into school, that may have been the first time he's heard his name spoken with nothing but kindness, that the whole class looked at him and smiled, that the teacher looked at him and smiled. That felt different to him, even if he didn't understand a word you said. And time will tell what he is good at. He might be the sweetest, the funniest, the smartest kid. He might be a genius. He might turn out to be your best friend. He might write a brilliant book. He might paint a brilliant picture. He might cure a disease. We don't know that boy yet, but I promise you, inside that kid is some special stuff, and saying something kind for him and to him and about him made an imprint and a difference for him. And you will probably never know the difference it made, but I promise you, it made the difference. But when I think about the number of times I impede that kind of moment, I'm sorry I'm going so long, but when I think about the number of times I don't say the simple, kind thing, the number of times I don't give the $5, the number of times I think there's no point, that's why I sang Unjaded earlier, the number of times I have to fight this inner resistance, the stories in my head about what I've never gotten. Nobody ever did that for me. That should have been me. Why isn't that me? I've known people, whatever story, whatever story, and that's my whole thing's about here, and for what it's worth, is to become aware of the feelings that you actually have, is to be true and kind and present, and not reactive. I have one more song to sing, but I'm going to do it during the offering. And like I said, I'm sorry I went so late. I didn't in the first service, and I'm friends with Josh Reeves, and he told me he might try to check out my talk today. And if he's watching, Josh, yes, I went late. Because he never does. Mr. Scrupulous. Anyway.
Thank you so much, Daniel.